Upper Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte. Today I have the honorable pleasure of speaking to a phenomenal woman. She has received numerous accolades, which include being named one of the top 50 women in the world to watch in 2008, earmarked as the most influential woman in government and business by Financial Services in 2009. She heads up a billion-dollar blue-chip company and has a strong passion for young people. Today I speak to Phuti Mahanyele, the CEO of the Shanduka Group. Phuti, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Gugu. It's wonderful to be here.
Likewise. Phuti, let's take a look at your upbringing. You were a Soweto girl,
Yes.
born and bred in Dobsonville, later moved to Claremont in KZN,
Right.
and then went to Lesotho, the capital
Yes.
in Maseru, and then came back to Johannesburg in the late 80s, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm concerned you know so much.
Well, I did do my homework.
Clearly.
I did do my homework.
Yeah.
But your life sounds like a phenomenal story, a fairy tale, if not so, because you also pursued your tertiary studies in the US and later in the UK. How was that experience?
Well, I think I really was very, I've always, I think, been very fortunate to be surrounded by people who've always been very empowering and created enabling environments for me. Starting off with my parents, who I think were really very visionary in the plans that they had for my sister and I. And really sought out to ensure that, first and foremost, that we would have the best education that they could possibly, afford to get for us. And I think that really laid the foundation for a really good future for us. Not only just in terms of careers, but just in terms of just understanding life, and so having, good parents was certainly a solid foundation to start off with. But I think also just in the years to come, I've just been very fortunate to be surrounded by, really wonderful, empowering people.
Most definitely are the definition of a global citizen after having attained your degree in economics at Rutgers University, that's in the US,
That's right.
and your MBA at De Montfort University in the UK, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Where did your love for numbers come from, having studied economics, which obviously back then was not necessarily the ideal career option for a black female?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a love for numbers as such, but I think certainly I was inspired, from my family members about being in a commercial environment and being involved in business, so that passion was there for that, to understand what it is that drives commerce, and so it was that passion. And so economics, I think many people who've studied economics, will say it's quite it's quite a broad subject, but it certainly sets a very good foundation in just understanding how the various how economies are driven essentially, but just on very different levels, whether it's through microeconomics or macroeconomic issues. So that laid a very good foundation. And it was only really once I started doing the graduate degrees that I started to be more focused around the areas that I then became active in.
I understand that you spent time at Fieldstone, an investment firm in New York, and later made your way back home. It's not very often that expats actually do come home after attaining a certain level of success abroad. What was the motivating factor behind your return to South Africa?
So that was a very it was quite a pivotal moment, because I had an opportunity to join another firm, another bank in New York, and to stay on. But it was also, it was a time in South Africa when, we had the dawn of the new democracy. And, I thought to myself, where else in the world would it make sense for a black woman to be? There could possibly be no other place than South Africa. And really, the opportunity to come back and to be involved in commerce in South Africa, in business in South Africa, for me was far more appealing than anything else. And so, it wasn't even a question.
Came back to where your roots were.
Yeah.
I understand you joined Shanduka in 2004 as the head of Shanduka Energy, and that's before you made your way to the post of CEO in 2010. But let's go back to the time when Cyril Ramaphosa, who's the chairman of Shanduka, approached you just before 2004, asking you to join his firm. What was your immediate reaction to that?
Well, I was hugely flattered, that, someone of his caliber would, first of all, even, you know,
even know.
I think that I would, you know, yeah, absolutely, that I could add any value to his business. And so it was what a wonderful opportunity. And so, you know, I think one of the best decisions I ever made was to say yes to that opportunity. And for me, I think it was mostly just about being able to work with him, you know, and, you know, in hindsight, you know, the growth and development and opportunities that I have been afforded by him have certainly been invaluable. Yeah.
Let's touch on your working relationship with Cyril.
Yeah.
He is a well-known businessman of note in South Africa who has literally worked his way from the bottom step of the ladder up to being a global phenomenon in the business sphere. How has that experience been, working so closely with him? I'm sure you have a few pearls of wisdom that you've gained from him.
Yeah, I think all of us do. You know, one of the wonderful things I think about Cyril is the fact that he really lives what he says, you know. He is, you know, just such a humble, down-to-earth person, and interacts and engages with people, you know, on the same level. And, you know, from that perspective, you know, you see that he really lives the values that he espouses and speaks of. And so being able to work closely with him has afforded me the opportunity to see just how important it is to be authentic and not to be saying one thing and doing another thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, and he impacts, you know, all of us who work with him the same way, you know, in that he really is just, he's a very authentic person. Yeah.
I've heard that there's some popular phrases that he often uses, that some things are pedestrian.
Yeah.
And make sure that you're not sleeping on the job.
Exactly.
But Phuti, after being mentored by such a remarkable leader in the South African sphere, how has that nurtured the importance of mentorship for you when it comes to working with some of the younger business leaders in your firm?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that sense of, you know, accountability and responsibility towards, you know, the rest of the community and, you know, the environment that you're in is something that is, you know, it's within the entire firm. And you know, obviously driven very largely, you know, by Cyril himself. And so every single person at Shanduka contributes towards the Shanduka Foundation, first of all, both financially as well as through time. And I think that ethos, you know, has really gone a long way in just defining the culture of our organization. To the extent that, you know, from time to time you'll find that, you know, someone, and it doesn't matter what role it is that they have in the organization, will come up with some initiative of something that needs to be done in the community, and, you know, the whole organization will rally behind that person. So, you know, to be in that type of organization where giving is a very natural part of what we do is something that, you know, I certainly have found to be wonderful. It's what, for me, makes Shanduka a wonderful place to work.
Sounds like a good place. We'll touch on the Shanduka Foundation a little bit later. But as we wrap up on Cyril, it sounds as though he's made a remarkable contribution to the Shanduka group as a whole. With his recent appointment to the Vice President of the ANC, what difference do you think he might bring about there?
Well, I really wouldn't. I wouldn't be able to speculate, you know, on that. But I'm sure that, you know, as he has always done in the past, that he will continue to make a very positive contribution with these new developments.
Let's touch on Shanduka's. It has several investments on the African continent. If anything, you guys are spearheading that on the local front. You have a stake in MTN Nigeria, an investment in Seacom telecommunications cables in Mauritius, a power plant in Mozambique, and that's just a few of many endeavors that you have out there. And this is quite a noticeable endeavor, because Africa has always been known as the dark continent. Do you see that stereotype changing?
Yeah, we started looking at expanding into the rest of the African continent, I would say probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And, you know, and what we wanted to do was to really create, use the platform that we'd had from South Africa to now grow into other countries. And what we have sought to do is to go and expand into the rest of the continent with our existing partners. And, one of the strengths that we have at Shanduka is that we've been able to build very strong partnerships. So the companies in which we're invested in are companies that are leaders in their markets, very strong, solid management teams. And so in expanding into the rest of the continent, we were seeking to expand together with them. And so we've been very, selective and very deliberate in the choices that we've been making as to, which countries, when, and how to enter those various markets. Over the years, there's been a plethora of opportunities that we have, had an opportunity to screen. And, when one looks at the African continent, the opportunities are massive, in number. But the issue is always about finding opportunities that really, make business sense or that are fundable, and so we have been very selective in making sure that we make investments that from our perspective make a lot of commercial sense. And so notwithstanding the fact that we have had a quite a I would say probably a deliberate approach and not been as aggressive as we could have been. I think we in hindsight it has probably been the right approach because we're very happy with the investments that we've made, and we'll continue to show our confidence in the rest of the African continent by putting our money there.
True.
Yeah.
Phuti, though, Africa is kind of plagued with a negative perception that it's tough doing business out there. It's a different culture mix, whether it's East Africa versus West, and even the southern region, as well as that it's plagued by the likes of corruption. Have you met these kind of frustrations when doing business there?
Yeah, I think it's the same challenges that you find anywhere in the rest of the world because although we invest on the African continent only, we our partners are throughout the world, and so we are interacting internationally. And so what we find is that these challenges that people see on the African continent exist everywhere in the world as well. And so there's nothing unique about them. And I think the issue is just to be aware of the fact that with each country that you're going to be facing different and unique sets of challenges. And so that is why I think we have been very careful in making sure that we understand those markets that we go into, and that we apply the right tactics as we go into those markets. And we have a very good team, and I think one of the strengths at Shanduka is the fact that internally we're very well resourced, and so we're able to do a lot of work in-house. We're not relying on external views to make investment decisions, and so from that perspective it puts us in a strong position to be able to make sure that we firstly make sure that we are originating investment opportunities that are in line with our strategy, but also that when we are implementing these transactions that it's not just about closing the deal, but it's about making sure that in 10 years 15 years time that we're happy about having made that investment decision. And so, I'm very happy about the way that we approach our investment decisions. Yeah.
I would assume that your international experience has also been an asset to you doing business in South Africa and on the continent as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Phuti, let's touch on black economic empowerment. Now, depending on who you talk to, this is either a necessary evil or another method of discrimination. What's your take on the current policies and the implementation of these policies in a way to for all of us to seek economic emancipation?
Sure. I think with black economic empowerment, clearly we know that it was about making sure that we would, ensure that people that were on the periphery of the economy would become involved in the mainstream, economy. And perhaps in the expectations of what black economic empowerment policies would deliver, there was probably an expectation that was probably false in that somehow it was perhaps expected that this would all just, you would immediately have an enhancement of, black participation in business in the same way. The reality is that as happens in any commercial space, you will have people who have got a long-term view on business and who want to invest for the long term, but you will have also people who are very highly opportunistic and who are just interested in the short term, or a combination. And so from that perspective, what has emerged from the policies is that, you have had people who have used the opportunities to either build sustainable long-term businesses, and then you've also had those people who've just taken the opportunity to just look at just, short-term cash generation opportunities. Now, is it to say that it is wrong for a business person to take a short-term opportunistic view on any opportunity? No, you can't, and so, I think it has been the fact that perhaps our expectations have probably not really, been correct, really. And then I think secondly is that unfortunately there has been a lot of focus on those businesses that have either failed or which have taken very much a highly opportunistic and short-term view, and not enough emphasis on businesses that are really growing for the long term. I was talking to someone who is running another black-owned organization, and I was saying to him that it really is unfortunate that businesses such as his are hardly ever spoken about. This is it's a business that has been, it's well established and they're very focused, well-run business. Whenever black economic empowerment is being spoken about, it's usually in very negative terms, but the reality is that there are good things that are coming from business. I mean, when I look at Shanduka and, the work that is being done by the Shanduka Foundation, I mean, we have well over 167 schools that we have adopted around the country together with our partners. And I think that we are making, quite a contribution towards education, whether it's in the form of infrastructure that's been provided through our adopter school, or whether it's through the bursaries that we provide to young people. And then, of course, we've got the Shanduka Black Umbrellas as well, where we are helping, small to medium-sized enterprises through this 3-year program, through which we help and incubate entrepreneurs so that they can get to a point where they have the critical mass to run a business on a sustainable basis. I think there are a number of things that black business is doing and doing well, but not enough is being said about that, and these have been the benefits of black economic empowerment. What we have done from, having been able to attain some critical mass in South Africa through the policies of black economic empowerment is that we've used that as a platform to then grow further. We've expanded into the rest of the African continent. In recent years, we've also divested from some assets, and we've taken the resources that we were able to get out of that, the cash that we were able to get, to reinvest into the business. For instance, when we sold our shares in Assor, we took that cash and we reinvested it into our business. And what did we do by reinvesting? We took shares where we had, businesses where we had minority stakes, and we increased those into controlling stakes, into those businesses. And it was very much in line of our strategy of making sure that we have businesses that we own and control. And so, I think, when we look at black economic empowerment, we need to look at it in a balanced way. And I think the policies have certainly created an opportunity for businesses to create long-term sustainable, futures and to create, good, solid businesses. But obviously there have been a lot of misstarts as well, but the focus should not just be on the misstarts.
That's true. I can tell you're passionate about this, as your the thesis of your master's was based on the impact of international trade on BEE.
Yes.
It was quite a few years ago, and I can tell that you're quite passionate about that. But wouldn't you also say it links back to education amongst the upcoming black entrepreneurs? I recently wrote a story on BEE stocks and investments, and it's often surprising to find out that first-time black investors aren't really familiar with the financial terms that are used. They're not sure what dividends, what a stake in a company is.
Sure.
Isn't that an important aspect that we also need to entrench and groom within the black community?
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's right, that, education does provide the platform for people to be able to participate more meaningfully in the economy and in any, form of the society. And so just getting the understanding of the basic terminology certainly is a good starting point so that people can participate more meaningfully. One of the things that I think has been very good for people to be able to participate in the economy has been these retail schemes where, people have been able to buy shares. Now obviously not all of them have been successful, but it has provided an opportunity for Madlamini who lives somewhere in, Umlazi or wherever to be able to buy a few shares in, a listed company and see, and participate, in that listed equity. And so I think over time, as people, start to understand, how business works and have access to these opportunities, we can start to see more people being involved in the economy and the growth of the economy.
Let's take a look at the development of women in the workforce. We all know that that's been a hot topic for a couple of years now, but it still seems as though it's a challenge. We often see more female graduates coming out of tertiary institutions, more females being in management in the workforce, but unfortunately that doesn't filter through to the leadership positions such as CEOs, even on listed stocks or listed companies rather on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Just how difficult is it for women to make it in the corporate industry?
It does continue to be a challenge, and we know that globally, and I suppose a large part of it is as a result of the various responsibilities that women have, and the reality is that they do have an important role to play in the home, and managing both those responsibilities in the home and the business does become a challenge, and I think as business and various other organizations, we need to be looking at ways in which we can be retaining that female talent in our organizations, and perhaps we need to be looking at more flexible views around being able to have retention, because at some point a woman may choose to go and and have a baby, and they should be able to come back into the organization and still be paid meaningfully, because one of the things that has been found is that income gap. That when a woman goes, on maternity, she comes back, and there's this income gap which is never actually closed. And so, those types of situations can be demotivating to an extent where if someone believes that they're not as valued as they ought to be, then they really no longer want to participate in that space and would rather be focusing perhaps on their family or, something else. So the reality is that the economy and the country needs all of our resources and talents, and so if we are going to be using the talents that come from women and their skills for them to be able to contribute, we need to be looking at the approach that we have towards the involvement of women in business and organizations, perhaps in a more creative way, and allow for some flexibility. I think the good thing though is that what we are seeing is that men are starting to play more of a role in their homes as well, but obviously that's not something that's as general as it could be, but you are starting to see more men becoming more involved in their homes, and so to that extent that does ease the burden, where you've got real partnerships in marriage as opposed to one person having the responsibility of the children and the home, and not having sufficient support.
Yeah, very true. Looking back at business today, we often know that there's a common constraint or disconnect rather between the private sector, government, as well as labor. And we've seen this coming up in recent stories. Just a few weeks ago that Amplats is looking at restructuring its organizations and could retrench thousands of workers, and government reacted to that with the FNB advertisement, where government also responded to that. Besides other than communication between the three parties, what else does it take for the disconnect between these three corners of a pyramid, if you will, to connect and unify in order to seek economic growth in South Africa?
Yeah. I suppose, it does ultimately come back to the communication, but communication having as a foundational basis trust. We need a more heightened sense of trust between business and government, so that you can be communicating with the same objectives. Because ultimately what we need to be doing is to be giving messaging externally that is about growing our economy and that is positive about our nation. And, that does not mean that, we should not be looking at ourselves and saying which areas do we need to be developing. The reality is that we do have the National Development Plan, which has pointed out very clearly where the areas are that the country needs to be looking at in terms of, developing the nation and taking the country forward. And so I think, what we ought to be doing is working together as business with government to see how we can support each other towards growing this nation. And so in terms of messaging, there ought to be that alignment, as well. It doesn't mean that we'll always see things the same way, but we certainly need to be having that alignment. I think when you look at, our rate of growth, you look at our high unemployment rates, certainly we're not, in a position to be starting to to be working against ourselves. What we need to be doing is really to be working closely together, both from a business perspective and working with government to find ways to ensure that we can grow our economy. And, we know that the challenges that we face as a country are not unique to South Africa. Unemployment is high, in Eurozone countries and in other parts of the world. And growth rates, we know, are slowing in many parts of the world, So we know that, globally, there are challenges, but the question becomes, how do we position ourselves as a country to be, to be able to grow and to be able to eradicate the inequalities that still exist within our society. And, we need to work together in order to do that. Working against each other will not move us forward.
I'm glad that you touched on that point, because at the World Economic Forum, which is currently being held in Davos this week, it seems as though that's the message that's coming across from the South African government together with business. And I know in 2007 you were voted as a young global leader back then at WEF. That's quite an honor and a great opportunity to mix and rub shoulders with quite influential individuals across the globe. How was that for you?
No, it was absolutely, unbelievable. It was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, and also to be able to engage with, other, young global leaders from around the world. I think that for me was just a hugely empowering opportunity. Through the process of that, we had an opportunity to spend some time at Harvard together, and with some of the professors there, and just hearing some of the stories that they had to tell, about their own development and growth, was hugely inspiring. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to have been a YGL. I'm no longer a YGL.
You still are in our books. It's okay.
But it has been a wonderful experience to have had that in the past. Yeah.
Speaking of young global leaders, your CV is very impressive, so much so that you would actually assume that it's someone much older than you, and then you walk in and you're actually quite shocked that it's a female of such a young age. And I know that you're quite passionate about young people. You engage in several endeavors, and last year at the Destiny Forum held at the Sandton Convention Center, you spoke about unleashing the potential that is locked in young people. Do you think South Africa is doing enough of this?
Well, we know that's not happening. We know that in terms of access to education, but also access to quality education, that not enough is being done. And so that is why we certainly need to be doing more of that. We need to be making sure that we're creating opportunities for young people to have access to good quality education. The fact that a young person can pass matric with 40%, is very, very concerning, because I think, we cannot have a situation where we are dropping our standards in order to accommodate more people to be able to pass. When someone finishes matric, and they go into university, they ought to be able to have certain levels of numeracy or literacy, to be able to understand that next level at the university level. But what you're finding is that when young people are going into university, they struggle because of quality of education that they've been exposed to. And so it is something that certainly needs to be addressed, because if we want to make sure that we use and develop young people into real contributors to our society, that is one area that we need to work on, is how we provide them with quality education. Yeah.
I know that your father, Phuti Mahanyele, also played quite an influential role in your life, and was a key driver of motivating you to get and further your education when you were still quite young. Would you say in the South African society now that it needs to be a mindset change, or it's a mindset issue with a lot of young South Africans out there?
It is. I interact with young people quite a bit, and what does concern me is just the focus on just the extrinsic stuff. I'll go to a school and, the kids are more interested in what car I'm driving or what shoes I'm wearing, and far less interested in what school I went to, or, why I decided to study, economics as opposed to something else. And so, from that perspective, it is concerning that young people are not being inspired towards things that will be a positive, contribution on themselves. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we are doing or are not doing for young people to not, be positively inspired. And I guess the reality is that as professionals, we tend not to be sufficiently visible in our communities. And so why should they be inspired to become a teacher or, a business person, or if they are not seeing those role models around them all the time, So we need to be more visible. We need to be, engaging and talking to them, a lot more, so that they can learn from what we've done, and, how it is that we've come to the point where we are in our careers and in our lives. And I think when we do see young people doing some of the things that they do, just being more focused on the clothes that they're wearing and things of that nature, than making sure that they get good marks at school. I think it's a question that we need to be asking ourselves is what have we done to have that, being brought about?
So for the young person listening out there, Phuti, who is smart or intelligent, but being smart isn't enough these days. You certainly need a few more qualities other than that. What would you say they need to work on and develop?
Confidence.
Confidence.
Yeah.
Such a key element. Why would you say so, though?
Confidence, because the reason being that, for me, one of the things that's always said is to find someone or meet someone who is very intelligent, very capable, but doesn't actually believe it themselves. So how on earth is anybody else going to believe that they have that capability if they don't have the confidence to show what they're capable of? Ultimately, to be able to move on and to achieve certain things, you need to engage with people, and so you need to have the confidence and to believe in your own capabilities. And so for me, that is a key ingredient.
So true. But for a person of your caliber, how would you say you've dealt with negative setbacks in your life?
For me, it's really been, I've always also had a strong spiritual side of my life as well, and I found that to be a great support, and also just having the family to support me as well, because you do go through a lot of challenging times, and so that's been very, very helpful. But also I've always been someone that perseveres in what I do, and I don't give up easily. And so, for young people also, just to really just stick out something, not start something, get tired of it or find a reason why it's not working, and then do the next thing again. You really need to have a sense of commitment, and so, I found that certainly has been helpful.
If you don't mind me touching on your family one last time, I know you lost your father, Phuti Mahanyele, last year in September, which couldn't have been easy for you, as well as your mother in 1989 when you were 17 years old. What life lessons have you learned from them that you have adopted in your life today?
Well, certainly with my mother, she was my age when she died. She was 42, and certainly from that I learned that life is short, and so I don't take anything for granted, and least of all time. I don't take time for granted. And I think that's why I always, I don't understand when I see people just, wasting, time. So that was a great lesson from my mother. But from my father, I learned many great lessons. Obviously I had more of his. We got to live longer with him, but many lessons. But mostly just around really just living life to your fullest potential. My father grew up in a family with about 10 or 11 siblings, and some of them adopted. And really his parents couldn't afford to give him the education, so he had to put himself through school. But looking at where he came from to what he was able to achieve, and then I look at myself and I think, well, surely I should be able to do more, and so really it's using what you have and really just making the most of it. Yeah.
Talking about doing more, I just want to close off with your future plans and what you'd want your legacy to be once you've gone.
Yeah, I really would wish that I would certainly would have used everything that I have, all my opportunities, all my skills, my capabilities and experience to the best that I can, and that in that process that many people would have been impacted positively by my life.
I take it those would be your takeaway points for young ladies like myself trying to follow in your footsteps?
Absolutely. You can do even more.
We'll try. Phuti Mahanyele, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. This upper echelon was brought to you by Deloitte for innovative and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte.